All
So
right.
I was driving home the other night, listening to music on the radio and an oldies station, and on came Pink Floyd with their song "We Don't Need No Education."
Hey, teacher, leave those kids alone.
Exactly,
We don't need no education. We don't need no thought control. Yeah.
exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So I was thinking about the themes of that song, the context, the time period. The message is pretty bold and confrontational. But then it occurred to me that that song is actually more relevant for our own time than
Well,
ever before. Yet we don't
all
have
in
this.
all,
We
all in
don't
all, it's just another brick in the wall.
exactly. But we don't have the same sort of countercultural activism in music, even though it's a it's more appropriate for our time. We don't have Bob Dylan type musicians talking about how the times are a changing. Why do you think that is?
There are several reasons. Firstly, it's because the people who are animated by that music now run the show. You know, the people who are rocking out
But
and feeling inspired by the wall and the times they are changing are now running the place.
well, that's true. But at that time, they weren't running the show. They were just a bunch of kids. So how is it that they got played back then? Whereas
Well,
now,
back then. They got played back then because they were pretty catchy, and they really reflected the time. Uh, you got to bear in mind that, how do I put this? They were also formed. They benefited from what had come before. They were, in many ways, the wealthiest and best educated generation this country ever produced. Well, that country, the one you're in. The generation of 68 over here was a little bit different because where our boomers were formed by affluence, the generation of 68 here was formed by immediate post-war poverty. You know, rambling around the
hmm,
wreckage of their childhood. Whereas ours, they were spoiled, and not unlike the Vatican II people, who by dynamiting the church's educational system ensured that we would never have that many people as fluent in Latin and Greek again in the ranks of the higher clergy. So too with that era, the very act of their taking over and changing things to fit themselves ensured that we would never have the same sort of talents develop. Uh, I mean, they got what they wanted, and what they wanted was crap. And now they run the show and they force it down everyone's throats. And what are you going to sing? You know, a protest against gay marriage? Who's going to play that? An anti-abortion lyric? No, that's not going to make the top 10. Promise you that.
well, there's a certain poetic lyrical style where you're not putting abortion directly in the limits. You attack it from a vague, with vague wording where
It
you
still
can.
it still wouldn't fly.
Okay. Well,
And part of the problem too, so I'm speaking specifically about the United States. It's interesting that in Europe and Latin America to a degree, things like folklore and folk music, etc., were very much the preserve of conservatives. I mean, not entirely, but to a great degree. Whereas in America, in the States, all that stuff fell into the hands of the left because conservatives were too busy making money. And that was American conservatism, which was really, as Gary Potter put it so well, the right wing of the national liberalism. I mean, there were a lot of different phenomena that fed into the perfect storm of drivel we have now. Um, and the thing is, unlike the church, is the state and society having these guys shuffled off to their grave. What's going to replace them? I don't see any great, and I could be wrong, of course, but I don't see any great artistic replacement, what I see is decline and decay, and I can't begin to think of what would pull us out of it. And this is a cultural problem, a political problem that's throughout the West. When I was in Czechia earlier this year, I happened to watch Czech television, and I ran across a band, Ondřej Havelka and his Melody Makers. Ondřej being spelled Ondrej, which is what your Czech cousins, that's how they spell Ondřej.
Okay.
But it's a revival thing, like like the Cicada Club in LA, or Alex Mendham in London, or Max Rabe in Germany. In other words, they're a sort of a jazz swing revival band. They're very good, all Czech, but a lot of their lyrics they sing either in English or in Czech, songs that were big in Czechoslovakia between the wars. I mention them because if you go to their website, he has a very heartfelt thing about how, like everyone, he's hoping for the next artistic, philosophical wave to come along and save us. He says, but how do you keep from going insane until that time?
Yeah.
And he says the only thing he knows how to do is to go back to the last time, as far as he's concerned, the music was really very good. And play that sort of music as authentically as possible. I was very touched by it, actually.
Yeah.
And I became quite the Ondřej Havelka fan to go with the other bands I mentioned. But in truth, we have not inevitably, that is to say, I don't think it was predestined, it didn't have to be this way, but we have become an exhausted culture. And you can see it in architecture, you can see it in poetry, you can see it in music, you can see it in theater. There's a reason why old music now outsells new music.
I didn't know that.
It's a surprise for you. So there's a reason why cassettes and vinyl are selling, which is crazy. It's true.
Okay.
So, I mean, there is, I think, an unconscious yearning, an unconscious nostalgia for something better. And unfortunately, church, state, society, and culture are not in a position for anyone to say, you're right, there is something better, here it is.
Yeah. Because I think music is an important, it's often overlooked. I think we think about television, we think about books, think about movies a lot, but music kind of gets skipped over. There's not a lot of literature on the impact of music. And
I agree 100%. Our friend Bill Biersack, of course, recommends highly a book about the genesis of rock and roll called The Triumph of Vulgarity. But, one of the things about, and I'm going back to the early 60s, pre-Beatles rock and roll, it was fun.
Yeah, like Buddy Holly.
Like Buddy Holly, like Dickie Lee, like oh gosh, I mean, I could go on and on. There was a joyousness to it.
The way I say it, or the way I've heard that I like the most, is it's music that brings you up that builds you up instead of brings you down.
Yeah, and also, I mean, a lot of it is music specifically for teenagers, but it exalts all the high point in being a teenager. I mean, if you could remember back to that time, I know you're very elderly, but if you could remember back to that time, you're young, you're in the first flush of life, everything seems new and exciting, you fall in love for the first time, you do everything for the first time, and there's just this thrill to being alive. Well, so much of the music of that time captured that perennial thrill.
Yeah.
And this was brought home to me, believe it or not, at my 10-year reunion from high school. I don't want to say when it was, but it was 1988. So, yeah, that tells you when I graduated from high school. Anyway, the music of the 70s, the music of my time, I hated disco and just garbage. Uh, but my classmates, many of whom had really enjoyed the music of our time, had come not to like it so much. Well, there's this 19-year-old DJ playing this stuff, and pretty soon the entire dance floor was empty, and everybody was in the hallways of the hotel to escape this stuff. I remember one girl saying to me, I played this record to death when I was 16, but I can't stand it now. And what they all wanted to hear was something from the 50s and early 60s because it captured the mood, the perennial mood of a high school reunion.
Mm.
Bittersweet or the great thrill, one or the other.
Yeah.
And, I went in and I said to the kid who was oblivious to the fact it was all by himself now. That whole ballroom was empty and he was just spinning tunes, He was into it. And I looked at him, I said, do you have anything else? Look around you. Nobody wants to hear this stuff. And he says, but mister, wasn't this the music of your era? Hugged my head in shame and walked out. And I told my classmates what he had told me, and they all went,
Hey, you boomers.
Junior boomers.
Whatever.
Because, see, the music you were liking was a little bit earlier. The Wall. And, of course, I know your favorite to rival The Wall in its depth is Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody.
Whatever. No, I don't like that song. I mean, it's okay. I like Hotel California. You know who I really like nowadays? The modern band. One of your nephews likes. Your nephew Michael. I like Mumford and Sons a lot.
Mumford and Sons.
You know that they're kind of like a folk style band. They do the banjo a lot, and it's songs that lift you up. And
he's played it for me.
Yeah,
he's played it for me, but not Green Day, huh?
No, not Green Day.
So what you're telling me is that sitting there high atop the Tumblr Tower, you're not an emo.
No. Sorry, buddy.
Gosh. Okay, well, we've got that out of the way. You're not an emo. That's something. This could be on a headline somewhere. Tumblr House president comes out. I am not an emo.
I think we're already past that. Like, the emo thing, that's like... I think that got started with, like, Linkin Park and some of these other, like, bands, where they have this certain singing tone that's just like, shut up.
What about Limp Bizkit?
Limp Bizkit is a little bit before. Limp Bizkit's like late 90s, early 2000s. I don't like Limp Bizkit at all.
What about
that's like the white
City
trash.
Rollers?
That's like the white trash era of rock and roll with Limp Bizkit and Kid Rock and Eminem and Eminem's all this. It's just a lot of. Blah.
What about MC Hammer?
Oh, there we go. Yeah, MC Hammer. Yeah, too legit to quit. Am I right?
We have to pray. We have to pray just to make it today.
That I don't know how that happened. I don't know how he happened.
Well, look, as far as music goes, I just want you to know that a long, long time ago, I could hear that music used to make me smile. And I knew that if I had the chance, I could make those people dance, and maybe they'd be happy for a while. But February made me shiver with every paper I deliver. Bad news on the doorstep. I couldn't take one more step. I can't remember if I cried when I read about his widowed bride. But I really got to tell you something. Something touched me deep inside the day the music died.
I know.
Can you guess what I started singing?
Yeah, Miss American Pie. It took me a while.
Yes, that's what I started singing.
My brother, he might have got this from you. My brother was trying to convinced me. This was a long time ago too. I don't know how I remember this because this was like 20 years ago. This discussion. He was making an argument how Miss American Pie was in actuality a reference to Vatican II.
Part of it is, I think. I think what he's done is all through it, he's conflated his personal situation with the situation of the world at the time. So it starts out with Buddy Holly, touches on, I think, the JFK assassination, the Altamont Music Festival, Vietnam. It's all in there in different places. But I think that the Vatican II reference comes at the very end.
What is that?
Well, he's tried everything else. He's tried music, politics, and all that. And finally, and I went down to the sacred store where I'd heard the music years before. But the men there said the music wouldn't play. And in the streets, the lovers screamed, the children wept, and the poets dreamed. Not a word was spoken. The church bells all were broken. And the three men I admire most, the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, they caught the last train for the coast the day the music died. And so, in that reading, the day the music died becomes not simply the death of Buddy Holly, etc., but everything else that happened over the next decade. 58 to 68.
Don McLean was Catholic, right?
I believe so. Raised Catholic, as we say in the industry.
Okay.
Well, the implication is always that he wised up. That's why today I say, well, Pope Francis was raised Catholic.
Now that you say that, I do see that a lot. Raised Catholic, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting.
The implication being that they're no longer so. I mean, I was raised Catholic. I've never stopped it, but
okay.
You were raised Catholic.
Yeah.
So it's great because you can say that to cast doubts on someone's faith without appearing to do so.